My name is Jackie Johnson Bernard. I'm 63 years old. I live in Calgary, Alberta, born and raised in Edmonton, Alberta, and I have had epilepsy for almost 40 years. It's been quite a journey, but despite the injuries and the surgeries I've had, I have to say that it actually strangely has enriched my life in unusual ways. Okay, so I recall having absence seizures as a child. I didn't really know what was happening, and I don't think anybody knew what was happening. My three siblings didn't notice, my mom didn't notice. But I recall sort of like staring out into space for like about, 10 seconds or so and just thinking that everybody did it. And so I never mentioned it to anybody. So I now know that those were absence seizures. When I was in my early 20s, I was working up in the Rocky Mountains in Jasper, and I had a couple of grand malls, but I was alone at the time in my room in staff accommodation, so not witnessed by anybody. And so I just thought I had passed out on the floor after partying too much the night before. My diagnosis actually came when I was working in Toronto in 1986. I had a grand mal seizure at work after only 3 hours of sleep, so that's a pretty good reason. And so I was taken to hospital and I was told very sternly that I would never drive a car, I would never have a child, I would never swim, I would never be able to have a bath alone in the house, and I would never be able to ride a bike. So, and also told, of course, that I'd be on medication for life. And at the time, I may have still been a little bit, lethargic and kind of, I don't know, I don't recall taking any of it seriously, except you've got to be on medication for life. I honestly didn't think the rest was going to apply to me, and fortunately, it really hasn't, except for the driving periodically after grand mal seizures. But that was my diagnosis. Came home to Edmonton a few months later. My mom took me to a neurologist there where the diagnosis was confirmed. And strangely, in my family, it was never really talked about. I don't know why. My parents are both gone now. My siblings don't remember anything. They were younger than I was. And it wasn't really a thing. I didn't see myself as having a label. I didn't see myself as having any limitations, except that I had to take this medication. I was never told that I shouldn't drink alcohol, which I now do not consume. And I was never told about any of the other seizure triggers, which I have learned about by life experience over the years. But that was my diagnosis since, being in Calgary for the last 36 years. I've, of course, have my primary family physician who helps me out. And then I have a wonderful neurologist now through the Foothills Neurology Clinic in Calgary. And I see him twice a year unless I need to see him. I can reach out to a nurse whenever I can. But I feel that I've been well supported through my diagnosis. And again, I don't see it as really life limiting, except for the medication. And I don't have a problem with not drinking. So as I mentioned, it just sort of, I don't think anybody was avoiding the conversation, but of course we didn't have the internet then. And I didn't, let's see, in the 80s, I was in my 20s. I really didn't avail myself of any information. I didn't reach out to any organizations, which of course I now am aware that there's lots of support organizations. So I just went about my life and didn't really give it a second thought. Then when the internet came along, and of course throughout my 30s, I had had some grand mal seizures. I had also had surgery when I was 31 years old, my first surgery of 3. And then when I started delving into the Epilepsy Canada website specifically and other websites, I was like, oh, wow, okay, there's all these seizure triggers. So yeah, definitely I would say the 80s were perhaps this era where we didn't know a lot about a lot of chronic conditions such as MS, ALS, lots of chronic conditions, because we just didn't have the information, especially neurological conditions. So basically, I enjoyed good health. I don't even know if I saw a doctor on a regular basis. I just had my prescription refilled and I took my prescriptions. Everything was fine. So definitely since we've gained the internet and Google, and I use the Mayo Clinic a lot for information, and I still to this day use the Mayo Clinic site when I look up things about, like yesterday I was looking up absence seizures. I was like, yeah, I did have absence seizures. So now, of course, I feel much better informed, and in general, as a society, we are better informed due to the internet and the plethora of information that's out there. Definitely, the Epilepsy Canada site has been the best for me in terms of identifying my triggers and identifying what to do, as well as seeking support. So, thankful that we live in this era now. And I'm also thankful. I've been told I have a mild case. I do know that there are others, especially I've become friends with a couple of Epilepsy Canada ambassadors who I've never met. And I know that they have had different experiences, more severe injuries. So again, I'm thankful for the information and I'm thankful for the support that I've had. So my main trigger is fatigue. So, as a young person in her 20s and, even early 30s, I thought I was invincible, as we all do. I thought I could party till 2 in the morning and, chug a bottle of wine and all by myself and get up in the morning and be at work at 8 o'clock. Well, guess what? I found to my cost that that was not the case. So no doctor has ever talked to me about triggers until I would say the 2000s. So again, in doing my own research, fatigue was definitely identified as one. Then stress was identified as another. I have never to this day been told by a doctor or a neurologist not to consume alcohol, which I now know is not beneficial, especially, when we're taking our anticonvulsant medications. I learned actually just this past summer that lack of hydration can be a trigger. Heat can be a trigger. We've had, some hot weather all across Canada. And much to my surprise, I was then able to link up some times where I had grand malls in my home on really hot days where I chose to have a nap under a feather duvet, which was not a smart decision, but I honestly didn't know. And then all of a sudden woke up and happened to have a grand mal seizure. Fortunately, I was in bed, so I wasn't injured, and it passed quickly. Definitely what I have done by choice was to leave the corporate world. I used to work in corporate HR. Prior to that, worked in the advertising industry as well as in the hotel industry. So 13 years ago, this was in conjunction with my daughter developing a severe illness as well. I chose to leave the corporate world, and I now am very happily employed with 2 part-time employers. What this does is it reduces my stress, it reduces my responsibility levels, and I don't work a 40-hour work week, except possibly at Christmas because I work in retail. And I will go out of my way. Definitely, I guard my sleep viciously. Like nobody better be making any noise after 10 a.m. And if I can identify my stress triggers, whatever it is, whether it's, pressure to participate in something or something that I've taken on voluntarily, or just a time crunch, or even driving in rush hour traffic, I will do anything I can to mitigate that stress because I know that stress is not good for me. Other than that, I try to eat healthily most of the time. I definitely drink of water. And again, as I said, by choice about 3 years ago, I decided to stop drinking alcohol. My husband also stopped drinking alcohol at the same time. So now it's just for special occasions. And honestly, I have to say, as someone who's had epilepsy for almost 40 years, in my 60s now, I feel healthy, I feel blessed. The only issues that I've had with my grand malls and then also more recently with a workplace accident is my shoulder dislocations, which I can talk about next, I guess. Yeah, so I've had 2 things that have really defined my journey with epilepsy. And actually, the first is having myoclonus. So, myoclonic seizures, which I will have in the morning. And so I'll have these, hand jerking motions, or if they're really severe, they'll be full arm jerking motions. And I didn't know what they were. I had no idea until I reported them to my doctor. So, spilled a lot of coffee. That's all I can say. Broke some dishes. So once I found that they were happening on a fairly regular basis, reported them to my family physician, he said, well, those are myoclonic seizures or spasms. So I was then put on a tranquilizer, first on Valium and then on Xanax, which I take now 3 times a day, because I was able to identify, especially at different times of stress. During COVID, I was working from home. That was certainly a stressful time. I didn't like working from home at all. I lost my father in 2018. I lost my mother last year. So during those higher times of stress, again, it's based on the trigger of fatigue, not enough sleep, as well as stress, mental stress. So I would find that I'd be having more of these hand spasms. And so then I'd be like, okay, better do something about this. So actually last year I was also given a smaller, lower dosage of Xanax, which would just to sort of, help bridge any difficult days or difficult times, but that's only on an as-needed basis. The other thing has been 30 shoulder dislocations by my lifetime count. If you've ever dislocated the shoulder, if anyone has, it tends to be more of a sports injury, a hockey or football injury. Mine have all been seizure injuries or post-seizure where the joint has become looser and looser and looser. So everything was fine until COVID, when I was doing yoga in my kitchen and just a certain pose popped my shoulder out. So at that time I had what's called a Bankart repair, and was connected with a fantastic orthopedic surgeon here in Calgary. That was done, and it was done fairly quickly because of the severity of the injury. My shoulder was coming out literally if I reached for, a jar of jam at the back of the fridge, or if I reached high up into a cupboard, I would feel my shoulder move. It didn't always come out fully, but it's definitely disconcerting. So then I had last year a workplace accident at one of my jobs where I fell off a stool, smashed my shoulder. And when I say smashed, basically it dislodged my previous surgical repair. It did partially come out at the time, and just by moving it around, I was able to put it back in. Again, that's not a very pleasant feeling. And then in going back to see my surgeon, he said, Jackie, there's no other solution but a replacement. And I said, fine, get rid of this thing. So I had my shoulder joint replacement last year in November. I'm actually still on WCB. I'm still on, a return to work program with my two employers. Right now, I'm only working 10 to 12 hours a week, and that's really all I can do at this time. It's not really due to my shoulder per se. It's more due to pain in the upper body and in the neck. But again, small price to pay to be walking around. I can still drive. I can still do all the things that I can. And the other thing I just want to quickly touch on is the fact that I was told I would never be able to have a child. And that was something that, again, it didn't really make an impression in the 80s, but once I married and, was like, okay, it's time to settle down. And then I thought, oh, wait a minute. Someone told me once that I couldn't have a child. So in speaking to my family physician at the time, he said, yeah, you can wean off your medication, see how it goes, track anything that happens. So I was actually off my medication for 7 years, and I was able to have my wonderful daughter, who's now 28 years old. But I did end up having one day, after, again, a lot of stress and fatigue, 3 grand malls in one day. So the thing that's important to remember for anybody, I guess, with epilepsy is even if things are going smoothly, things can go sideways very quickly. And that's why we have to be sort of vigilant. It's not always fun. It's not great to be the party pooper and go, okay, it's 10 o'clock, I'm going to bed now. No, I'm not going to have that second glass of wine. But that's what we have to do. And again, when I think about other conditions, the one I'm most familiar with is diabetes. My dad was diabetic. There's a lot more limitations there. So honestly, this might be an unusual view. It hasn't really cramped my style too much. If anything, it's made me appreciate the things that I can do. I have faced no stigma whatsoever. I have encountered just curiosity, interest, and surprise. So as I mentioned, when I've told people that I have epilepsy, when I declare to any new team members or new managers that I work with, or if I'm volunteering, they're just like, oh, okay. And then they'll tell me their experience of a classmate or somebody that they knew with epilepsy. Honestly, no stigma whatsoever. Now, maybe after a grand mal, but honestly, I have people in my life who have seen me have grand mals, and there have been no issues at all. So I don't know how much stigma is out there. It has not been my experience in any way, shape, or form. So again, I guess I've been lucky that way. I know that certainly in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and maybe 80s, maybe even earlier, I know that people who were, even that term epileptic, which to me, I prefer to say, I'm a person living with epilepsy or I have epilepsy. It's my knowledge that epileptics were put into, psychiatric hospitals in the early part of the century and maybe even later. I don't know. So that is astonishing to me. But when I think about it, I understand it. The other thing I'm comforted by, this might sound strange, when I look back in Wikipedia on the historical figures that had, or the historical individuals that had epilepsy, like Julius Caesar, Agatha Christie, so many. I think Bob Dylan has epilepsy, and Nick Jonas. There's a few people. Again, that's just one part of me, and that's just one part of them. But no stigma at all, and I feel really fortunate. Medication and surgery have been a huge blessing to me. So I've been on the same medication for, my 39 years, which is carbamazepine, otherwise known as Tegretol. The dosage has definitely been increased over time to the point where we found a dosage that was working. The other one, as I mentioned, was a tranquilizer, Valium or Xanax, otherwise known as alprazolam, which controls the myoclonic seizures. If I didn't have those, I'd be in big trouble. On one occasion, actually, so I take a dosage of Xanax at 5:30 p.m. On one occasion, I went out for dinner with a friend and I forgot to take it with me. So I contacted my husband and my daughter in desperation and I said, can one of you bring me my medication? This is what it is. They already know. They know it's a purple tablet. And my daughter, bless her heart, drove to the restaurant that I was at and she sort of just handed it to me. And again, I was open with my friend. I said, yeah, I need to take this medication. Would anything happen if I didn't take my medication? Probably. I think that if I didn't, especially take those supplemental doses of Xanax, from my recall of my grand mals, they would lead into, sorry, yeah. So if I didn't take my Xanax for my myoclonic spasms, they would lead into a grand mal. That is the one thing I want to avoid for many reasons. First of all, for injury, that's the main thing. I'm scared to death of injury. I happen to know there's two, as I mentioned, two of the ambassadors with Epilepsy Canada who have had other injuries. I have to give a shout out to Vanessa, who has had broken teeth, so I've never fallen forward, I've always fallen backward. So absolutely medication is essential. And then my surgeries for my shoulder. So I had my shoulder joint replacement, and I don't know if you can see, I have a few scars here. Impressive array of scars, so 3 of them. And my plan is eventually to get a tattoo. I'm not ashamed of my scars. I openly display them. And if anyone asks, like people will say, whoa, what happened to you? And I will tell them, and I'll tell total strangers what happened. I'm aware of the brain surgery that is available to people that have really severe cases. I think that is fantastic. I'm not a candidate for that, but absolutely, we need to support our medical professionals and the epileptologists and neurologists out there with developing, other surgical treatments and other medications that can help us out. I also, with medications too, I've never experienced any of the side effects that I read about, when you get your little printout from the pharmacy and it talks about lethargy or dizziness or this or that. I've never had any side effects. Maybe my stomach is cast iron, I don't know, or my system is, but I've been really blessed that the medications haven't really caused too many issues for me. Well, I certainly do. And again, in my lifetime, I'm 63 years old, and there have definitely been advances in epilepsy, especially with the surgical remedies for the brain surgery with the vagus nerve and the vagus nerve implant, I think is what it's called. When I had all of my shoulder surgeries, when my orthopedic surgeons have said, well, what happened? How did you do, was this playing hockey, Jackie? And I'm like, no, these are seizure injuries. And they honestly didn't bat an eyelid. So apparently orthopedic surgeries are common, especially with the shoulders. Absolutely, research is essential. That's why, again, I talk about it. I do fundraise for Epilepsy Canada for my birthday, and I haven't participated in any of the local fundraisers. I just haven't had time, but I will. And definitely, I urge people to consider Epilepsy Canada and epilepsy as a cause that they do direct funds towards. I mean, certainly we know that cancer is huge in terms of shortening or ending one's life. But there's other conditions that are equally as deserving and maybe even different in a way, because it does affect one's day-to-day life all the time. Like, I'm thankful that this is not a fatal condition, although it could be. I'm certainly well aware of, and I'm I've read about the cases of SUDEP. I've never worried about that for myself because I guess I wouldn't be able to do much about it anyway. But I certainly that was something I discussed with my husband when we first met and we were getting to know each other. I had said, I could die in bed one night, and he was like, okay, all right, well, if you do, I'll just deal with it. So he's pretty chill. I have to say, surrounding oneself with supportive people too, and again, that comes back to even the research and the funding and development that we can give to Epilepsy Canada. It's all about how we support ourselves and who we surround ourselves with. So we have great doctors and neurologists all across Canada. We have great organizations like Epilepsy Canada. I go there all the time and read up on things just because. And the local chapters as well. Like, I mean, they're doing their best to support the local community. I do have to say, I would like to see more awareness. One thing I was happy to see was the Calgary Tower, as well as the CN Tower in Toronto, whenever they have the March 26th, light up the night, Epilepsy Day. I'm thrilled to see those photos of the purple towers and all the bridges and other locations across Canada. That is really exciting. I will put a note out to people on Facebook saying wear purple on this day, and I wear purple. Purple was always my favorite color. So absolutely, I encourage people to dedicate any spare funds that they have towards Epilepsy Canada and towards the research that can support our doctors and our pharmacists for sure. I wish that people understood if they meet someone living with epilepsy that it's just one thing about them. So I'll give you an example. I'm left-handed. So what? I'm left-handed. I wear glasses. I've worn glasses since I was a child. I have epilepsy. So it's nothing that makes you weird or strange or defective. I know that in the early part of the century, you were seen as defective. I've never thought of myself that way. I mean, I don't think of myself as defective. I mean, yeah, it sucks wearing glasses sometimes. I don't see myself as defective, being left-handed, any of those things. It's just a thing. It's no big deal. And people with epilepsy maybe need a little bit of extra support from their friends and family. Other than that, it's no big deal. So I think if we were to think about it as something fairly minor, unless of course the individual has a really severe case where they are having hundreds of seizures a day and where they cannot work or go to school or volunteer or whatever, cannot drive. I think that generally in society, if their case is well managed, it's no big deal.